Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing is brought to you by the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. At NHC, we believe that solving America's housing challenges requires bringing people together. That's why we unite leaders from across the housing ecosystem, lenders, developers, affordable housing advocates, policymakers, researchers, civil rights groups, and industry partners to advance tangible, impactful, and achievable solutions for today's pressing housing needs. As an NHC member, you'll gain access to exclusive policy insights, our weekly member brief, working groups, research like our Paycheck to Paycheck database, discounts on our nationally recognized events, and a network of leaders shaping the future of housing. Whether you're looking to stay ahead of policy developments, build meaningful partnerships, or help drive real change, there's a place for you at NHC. Join the conversation by becoming a member of the National Housing Conference. To learn more about membership and all the benefits of joining, visit nhc.org/membership. Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference. I'm joined today by San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria, a lifelong public servant whose leadership has been shaped by a simple lesson from his parents. If you care about something, leave it better than you found it. A third-generation San Diegan, Mayor Gloria has spent his entire career in public service, from running the district office of Congresswoman Susan Davis to sitting on the San Diego City Council and in the California State Assembly, and now San Diego's 37th mayor. As mayor, he has made increasing housing production and improving affordability central priorities while working to ensure every neighborhood has the opportunity to thrive. Mayor Gloria currently serves as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, where he is helping elevate housing affordability as a national priority and advocating for stronger federal-local partnerships to address the nation's housing shortage. Mayor Gloria, thanks for joining us. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm thrilled to join you, David. Any opportunity to talk about housing, I'm excited to.
I know. We're going to nerd out on housing here.
Yes, my apologies in advance to your listeners.
Not at all. That's why they tune in. So I always like to start with a way for folks to just get to know you. And I'll ask you, what's the most interesting and important fact about you that has nothing to do with your work?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question for me, David, because I like to tell people I'm a very boring person with a very interesting job. So if you strip me of my occupation, sadly, I have to confess there's not a lot there, but I aim to change that in 2029 when I'm done being mayor. But I would say that I am a unique, I think the paper once said, like a frothy blend of ethnicities. What they were trying to say is that I'm part Native American, Filipino, Puerto Rican, and Dutch. And as you would expect from the mayor of San Diego, our nation's proud military town, all four of my grandparents came here from all around the world. And when they got here, they realized this is paradise and they stayed. And I share that to say that I kind of feel comfortable in all rooms, but maybe don't belong in all rooms either. I don't know. It's growing up, there weren't a lot of people that were quite so mixed. That's a bit different today, but it has certainly informed kind of my approach to the world, where we growing up would have family celebrations that could include everything from turkey and gravy to tamales to lumpia. It's very much a part of who I am.
You are really the consummate American.
Yeah.
It's the melting pot taken to its most complete sense. And you're a third generation San Diegan, which is, I think, probably not typical.
Not certainly when I was growing up. It's a bit more common today, in part because of our housing crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I won the geographic lottery being born in this town, which is
no
a little
kidding.
easier to do if you're born here, but relocating here can be hard, and then increasingly staying here can be hard. So yeah, I feel very fortunate to be that. It's given me, I think, a very strong understanding of my town and what it thinks and what it feels. And when you're trying to lead on issues like housing, which is often a very controversial subject, when you're talking to neighborhoods and residents about their communities changing, I do so with the benefit of a really long history of where our city has been and a very clear vision where we want to go. I think that's how it'll help me not only be mayor, but hopefully advance an aggressive agenda that is moving the city in the right direction.
We're going to get into that, your housing agenda, because it's pretty impressive, I have to say. I'm a numbers guy. And when I worked at a private company, one of the first things the president of the company told me is, you are what you track. And your tracking is pretty darn good. So we're going to get into that. But you've spoken about growing up in a working class family and watching your parents really struggle with their housing costs. How does that shape your personal philosophy about housing and how you exercise that in terms of policy?
Well, we're both housers, right?
Yeah.
And I think the seed of my housing advocacy really came from my own experience growing up, where parents would definitely struggle to pay the rents. Can remember the phone ringing in the kitchen, knowing that was the landlord wondering where the rent was, right? And it was going to be a couple of days late. And that sometimes 6-7-year-old Todd had to answer that phone and maybe deliver that message. So I think I understand from a very early age about housing instability. I've also experienced the opposite of that. My parents are working class folks, and in time were able to buy a single family home in my city. And fast forward today, I think that's nearly impossible for folks who, in my mom's case, was a maid, my dad was a gardener. And I say that it informs my experience because I know what is possible. It was doable 2 generations ago, and we can get back to it again if we make perhaps different choices. But it was a seed that was planted that was later tended when I was given housing as a subject matter when I was working for the Congresswoman, and the rest was history. I became absolutely addicted to the issue and understanding how it was important on an individual level, like with my family, and then on a macro level for all the things that we wanted to do, in that case in the congressional district, but now as a whole city.
Yeah. I often reflect on the fact that I'm about 1 generation apart from that. My grandfather was an immigrant who ran a junkyard, and my dad grew up working on the junkyard and got his first house because of the GI Bill of Rights. And not everybody got to use that. And that really kind of plays out through the generations as well, the privilege and gratitude I think I have for being a beneficiary of that experience. It's incumbent on us to pay it forward.
Yeah.
You talk about the values your parents instilled in you and how you've grown from a city council member to a mayor. Now you're the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. How do those foundational lessons really shape your leadership?
It's everything. Growing up and having to answer those calls, you might understand why at the time I didn't necessarily feel great about my family situation. Looking back, I realized I maybe didn't have the parents I wanted growing up, but I had the ones I needed. Be clear, we always paid the bills. It may have been a little late, but they always got there. My parents were the hardest working people I've ever met in my entire life. And even with the circumstances that we found ourselves in, always the highest morals, highest values, always you had to work hard, no excuses, move forward. And that really gave me a resiliency that was pretty much perfect for being a life in politics. And I think that lesson about leaving things better than you found it, quickly for your listeners, the way that actually played out, we sometimes didn't have a car at various points in my upbringing. And that's not easy in today's San Diego. You understand how impossible that was.
Totally.
Then. And when we would borrow someone's car, my brother and I were always tasked with washing the car before we would return it.
Oh, interesting.
We have to gas it up, and gas prices aren't what they are today, but they also weren't cheap back then either. And it's kind of a head scratcher because I understood we didn't have money. Why are we spending money on soap and sponges and water and gas? And there's you're not going to return this car in worse condition than we received it. You have to show respect. This is what you do. I don't think they meant it as a prescription for public service, but that's really what it ended up being. I took to myself, okay, there's litter on the sidewalk in front of the house. We got to pick that up. I'm not going to wait for someone else to do it. So that's what I mean about, they taught me all the best things. And when I found my way to good mentors and other folks that maybe were a bit more political, I came to that with a solid ethical foundation that has served me extremely well in public office.
I mean, that's such a great life training, but it really is the perfect attitude for being a mayor. And it should be in the job description, frankly, because you get to do all of that. I always think of it as the hardest job in America because there's nothing that people don't hold you responsible for in their town, and a lot of it for good reason.
It's true. When I was in college, I was fortunate to be awarded a Harry S. Truman Scholarship. This is the nation's living memorial to the former president.
Mm-hmm.
And when I accepted my award at his presidential library in Missouri, they gave us all the president's sign that he had on his desk in the Oval Office, which says "The buck stops here." It sits on my desk to this day, and it is exactly right. I don't care what goes wrong in your day. Chances are you're probably going to think the mayor had something to do with it. And often people are wrong, but sometimes they're right. And, I sort of embrace that responsibility. I'd say that I have an OCD issue with a hyper responsibility complex. And so probably the exact right person to be mayor, because that pothole that I see is going to weigh on my mind because of the OCD. And I'm not going to stop till it gets fixed because of that hyper responsibility gene that I have.
I remember when Mayor Menino in Boston was late for a meeting we had in Boston with him. And he was the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors at the time. And he was late because he was riding a snowplow.
Haven't had a lot of opportunity to do that.
No, be grateful for that. So let's talk about San Diego. It's one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. Median home price, almost $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the median. And that's really kind of breathtaking. Why is that so? I mean, obviously, when John Denver called West Virginia almost heaven, he had never been to San Diego, but you can steal that.
No, I will use that.
Oh, yeah. But it's more than that. And so without blaming your predecessors, how did the city get into this situation? Because it's not tenable.
Yeah. Well, you start in the exact right place. This is absolutely phenomenally gorgeous community, beautiful weather. We're so blessed. And my grandparents saw it themselves when they got here. Generally, people come here through military service. We're on the Pacific Rim. We're on the U.S.-Mexican border. We welcome people here. We have a thriving tourist economy. People come and very commonly they choose to stay. And so there's that curb appeal that is irresistible. But I think the bigger challenge for why we are where we are in terms of $1 million being your kind of average go-to to buy a home is that we just haven't built at the rate that we need to as those visitors come and make the decision to stay. My grandparents were fortunate to arrive at a time when the city was much smaller. We had much more area for which to grow, and the policies at that time really facilitated that. Somewhere about the time of my birth is when things started to slow down from a housing production perspective. And the population growth did not slow down. We rapidly grew to what we're at today, which is the 8th largest city in America. I don't think people always understand that.
Really?
8th largest city in the United States, 1.4 million people within our city limits. And the way I explain it, David, is that when I was born, the city was averaging right around about 15,000 new homes per year. Fast forward to recent history, that average is right around 4,000 per year. Now, when I was born, the city was about 700,000 people, and today we're about 1.4 million. So if you double the population in about a half a century's time, but you reduce the housing production by more than 2/3, it is absolutely expected that you would have a housing affordability crisis, a homelessness crisis, a situation where you have homes that the median price is $1 million.
Yeah. I mean, I often am asked, why do we have a housing crisis? And I said, there's 3 reasons: supply, supply, and supply. And it is pretty simple math. And yet you've figured out how to build tens of thousands of net new units. It's really, looking at the numbers, I'll let you brag about that, but it is pretty incredible and very hard to do, especially in California. And I'll just say that I read a recent study, said there were 3 lessons that stood out from, if you want to learn from San Diego. Bipartisan continuity leads to durable policy. Streamlined review only works with the staff to execute it. And stacking reforms multiplies impact. So let's just go through those because I want to learn about what that means, how you've executed on that, and as now head of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, what your colleagues can take from that. So bipartisan continuity leads to durable policy.
Yeah. So I'm in my 6th year as mayor, and I have initiated plenty of my own programs and policies to advance this pro-housing agenda. But I acknowledge that I'm building on the work of my predecessors who generally shared my point of view. I think the difference has been that the successes do need to build upon each other, right? One program by itself is not sufficient. And so some of the underlying things that they started, I think about our Complete Communities program, which was adopted the year before I became mayor. But my implementation of it, my willingness to devote the resources to actually staff up and then set high expectations for staff to actually deliver. So it has provided the consistency across administrations, frankly, the certainty that investors and developers need to have if they're going to build the housing that San Diegans are going to live in. So I think that has given some more confidence in the marketplace that we are a good investment, and that's probably invaluable in a period of high inflation and high interest rates.
And, we see that in Washington in both extremes. When you look at the latest legislation, the first housing bill in a generation, the past 21st century road to housing bill, this is about bipartisan policymaking and durable policy. When you look at like the recent CRA exercise that just came out from 2 out of the 3 regulators because they couldn't even agree, that pendulum has been swinging on CRA for 15 years, and there's nothing to show for any of the efforts. And this won't be any exception. So I think that durability is so important, and it's attractive to investors.
You're exactly right. I mean, I freely acknowledge that folks can put their money in any town they want to put it in, right? And I need to create the circumstances for which people would choose San Diego. Now, again, I think my weather and quality of life are value adds, but I'm not content in getting by on my good looks, right? I need to make sure that we're creating an environment, and a durable one, as you say, that really says that, if that permit's going to take a minute, and my goal is for it to take seconds, not minutes, but to the extent that it's a longer term play, they need to know that the rules are going to stay the same or potentially get better, which is what we've been telegraphing with some success.
So the second one was streamlined review only works with the staff to execute it. And I love that. That really sounds like it comes right out of Dan Gilbert's Isms book. But tell us about that and how you actually execute that principle.
Well, so we do, whether it's my predecessors or my own policies you put in place, you have to have the hands to actually process the permits, right? And one of the challenges I experienced beyond getting elected in the middle of the pandemic, and let me just tell you, you haven't lived till you had your inauguration on Zoom. I mean, it really was exactly what I had worked so hard to achieve, but that's okay. Anyway, we had about 1 in 4 seats at the city was vacant, right? And so, process this permit, but if there's no one there to answer the phone or type in on the keyboard, how's it going to get done? And so what we did is sort of 2 things. One was I really challenged staff and said, for what we need the most, and initially this applied to 100% affordable housing projects, I expect project review to be done in 30 days or less. David, I'll tell you that the reaction from staff was not favorable, understandably. I think that they had experienced a real brain drain and flat salaries for a long period of time. There was a period of time in our city where pensions had been removed from our employees, making us further less of an employee choice. Yeah, it was a whole thing. I could do a 10 podcasts on that. But point is that there was a real...
Oh, was that during the bankruptcy, the whole...
We never went bankrupt.
You didn't go, but there was all this, Orange County, I think.
In San Diego, we had a situation where one of my predecessors made the unfortunate choice to underfund the pension system. And eventually that catches up with you. And it did. The end result was a ballot measure that removed pensions from employees and placed essentially a 10-year hold on raises. And unpredictably, you end up with an exodus, which is what we had.
No kidding.
So you get this new energetic mayor who's like, I want to build housing. And here, I want you to process these permits super fast. And the answer is, well, we have 25% less people than we had before. So setting that high expectation and then matching the resources to actually accomplish it, we ended up staffing up pretty significantly and without some criticism. But at the end of the day, when I can tell you that you can get that project review in 30 days or less, the industry was willing to participate, and we were able to find people who wanted to be a part of something that was doing something that was nation leading. And David, I'm here to tell you that those staff who were skeptical at first now are doing that work on an average of 9 days. And
Really?
it was so successful that I came back and said, congratulations, my city employees. Your reward is that we're now going to do this for all transit-oriented development projects that, and they have continued to operate at that really expedited clip. And so we're putting up numbers that are impressive historically and not where I want to be just yet. I recognize industry has to test this and feel like there's a real commitment that's here. And this is year over year, we're going to continue. I mentioned earlier that we were doing historically before I was born about 15,000 a year. More recently, right around 4,000. We hit nearly 10,000 units one in single year just a year ago. And so what I'm seeing is a trend line that's extremely encouraging. And it is that policy being matched with managing those high expectations and then staffing to actually get the job done.
So one of the things that I find the most challenging in working with career, I won't just say politicians, but also regulators or people in government, is they've never had to run a P&L. And they don't understand, and not in any way that's a criticism, that's just never had to deal with it, the time value of money. And that delay has a direct impact on how much subsidy you burn on a project and how expensive per unit it costs to build. And you get that. I mean, it's embedded in almost everything you said about this. And so I am really curious, like, where did you get that from? And what's the process of really figuring that piece out? Because it's not intuitive when you're a policy guy.
Right. No, I love that you mentioned that because I do think that as I talk to some of my colleagues, that perhaps deficit, if you will, of knowledge can be a real impediment. And I don't want to represent that I got an MBA. I surely don't. But to your question of where did this come from, I served on a lot of nonprofit boards before I went to public office. And it feels like the same level of accountability, right? Like if you don't get this right, this nonprofit's not going to happen. And the people who are relying upon you for services. So my first balance sheets and audits and whatnot all came from that at a scale that was a little easier to deal with than the eighth largest city in the country. The principles are still the same, right? And ultimately, a lot of folks in industry have taught me, listen, I can do this for you, but you've got to give me some regulatory certainty. You have to de-risk these projects. You have to, I'll deliver something that's maybe a little bit more affordable, but without subsidy, but I need a certainty of process that is reliable. So I appreciate what I've learned through my own life experiences, what folks have taught me, but you're 100% right. I mean, really, this just comes down to, can this thing pencil? I think most policymakers understand that this does a pencil. But I don't think they always appreciate how much influence they have individually over whether or not that thing pencils. Are you holding your staff accountable? Are you setting high expectations? Are you devoting your own resources that will actually get more resources from the private sector? That's the kind of stuff that I just learned over time. And I appreciate you mentioning that's a value add. It's something I kind of spend a little extra of my free time on, just trying to read up about that and putting myself in the shoes of some of the folks who come see me about things. By the way, it works both ways. Sometimes I can sniff out when what I'm getting is not the best deal for the taxpayer and tell folks, no, you know what? You need to try harder. You need to sharpen that pencil and give me a better deal for my neighborhoods and the folks who are going to live with the construction impacts for a period of time.
Yeah. When I was doing this in Detroit, I used to say, anytime a developer sends me a P&L or a pro forma in a PDF, I know there's a lot of BS on that Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah,
there's a lot they don't want me to see.
Yeah.
So the third one is stacking reforms multiplies impact. And I love that one in particular because that's the thing that people often ask, what's the most important thing in the housing bill? And I'm like, the housing bill. It's all of it. It's all interconnected. But tell us how that plays out in San Diego and for cities generally.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And it's important to say, I think sometimes people come see me and, Mayor, why is the rent so high? And they want a single answer. And I kind of gave you one earlier about our lack of production, but the reasons behind that are many and varied, right? And there's no silver bullet that's out there. So if you have a mayor, a council member, or really any elected official who's like looking for the thing, they're going to be disappointed to know that needs to be a bunch of things. So in our city, we've done everything from update our general plan so that the citywide sort of approach to development is understood. We've updated dozens of community plans, so the neighborhood scale, blueprints, and that creates a regulatory certainty of kind of a shared vision, neighborhoods, business owners, et cetera, on what they want the city to look like. And then you overlay things like our Build Better SD initiative, our Complete Communities initiative, the accessory dwelling unit density bonus program, the density program, bonus program overall. These interlocking policies really do create a situation where things begin to pencil pretty quickly. And I think that's helpful. And this is where I want to give a shout out to our partners at the state level. We have increasingly a state government that is aligned with cities like mine that want to build more housing. And why that's beneficial is that they also give me some incentives that I can work with to make projects actually come to life. It also helps tell some of the cities nearby that maybe aren't doing their part that they got to get in this game. David, I'll tell you that the biggest exposure I have is that when the rent's more affordable or when the kids moving off the couch and into their own place, this is generally popular stuff. But I often will hear from San Diegans, man, we can't solve the state's housing crisis all by ourselves. We need these other jurisdictions to get involved. And when Sacramento passes some of this aggressive legislation, it says, yeah, they may not have a mayor or city council that shares our point of view, but the state's going to make them do it, right? There's going to be accountability there. So that's beneficial. And this is why I think you and I both are thrilled about the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, because what I've learned through the U.S. Conference of Mayors is this is not a San Diego issue. This is not a California issue. This is an American issue. And when we can have local, state, and federal policy all pointing in the same direction, I do have much more optimism that this problem can be addressed more successfully and more Americans can see themselves being able to pay for housing they can actually afford and actually be able to buy a home and kind of experience the American dream for themselves.
Yeah, the chair of the housing subcommittee in Congress is a guy named Mike Flood, who is from Lincoln, Nebraska. And they have a real affordable housing crisis in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I often say, if you got an affordable housing crisis in Lincoln, Nebraska, everybody's got an affordable housing crisis.
That's right. And the good people of Nebraska are lucky that they have a Congress member that some of the things you've been kind to say about me. I mean, Mike gets it. He's willing to do the work on it. And I give him and Maxine Waters, Emmanuel Cleaver, Tim Scott, Elizabeth Warren, this kind of interesting crew of folks that if you probably look at their respective Twitter accounts, you'd think that they could never come to any agreement on anything. And yet they aligned on this issue of housing. And it makes the point, I'll repeat it, that you just made perfectly. So this is a problem all across the country. And in my role as the president of the Conference of Mayors, I really, truly am struck by the fact that, we are a nearly 100-year-old organization made up of Republican, Democrat, and independent mayors. And we all agree that this is the issue to work on. And I think we can claim some credit for the helping to push through this bipartisan housing bill that has not been done in over 3 decades.
Always a fan of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Will note, founded in Detroit, just a few years after NHC was. So I know you're aware about the book Abundance and basically an indictment of how government doesn't work in California. There's another book called Breakneck by Dan Wang. And this is about China and how it can build anything at any cost, including any cost to people, the environment, markets. They have more high-speed rail than the entire rest of the world combined. And probably 3/4 of it is empty all the time. And so there's space in between.
Yes.
But I think it was fascinating reading that book after reading Abundance, because it's this idea of a lawyer culture versus an engineering culture. Most people don't realize that the Central Committee of the Politburo in China has been exclusively run by engineers since Deng Xiaoping. Every single member of the Central Committee has been an engineer, and that comes with its own costs. So we want to protect people. We want to make sure that we're not creating opportunities for theft, but at the same time, we layer these requirements on top of each other, and we have a whole building full of lawyers saying, well, what about this and what about that? How do you find that middle ground? Because I know you're very well aware, if you get that wrong and you lean too far towards the deregulation piece, something's going to happen and it's going to be bad.
Well, I'd be very clear. There is a golden middle path in there. I just don't know that people have really spent the time to try and find it. And if it's those biases of the Chinese example or the more contemporary California example, I mean, these are neither of these are great options. What I would say is that naturally, to be very explicit, I'm a capitalist. I fully subscribe to that approach. I would say that we have to respect private property rights. And frankly, that works both ways, right? That to the extent that you own a piece of property and you want to do something in particular with it, if it doesn't hurt yourself or harm the health and safety of others, we've had this discussion around accessory dwelling units, I think nationally, but certainly in California and definitely in San Diego. And, what I know for sure is that the conversation can be about what's the shadowing impacts on the neighbor's backyard. And that's a thing. I admit that. But I think what abundance tries to get at is what is the actual impact on the people who end up being unhoused or who are living a lifestyle that is impacted because of the lack of housing. What I've tried to do, and this goes back to my own family experience of what is the human toll? What's the environmental toll of our inability to build housing? I'm fond of saying, and many others are as well, housing policy is climate policy. And that doesn't always resonate with some of my friends who are deeply involved in the environmental movement, but it's 100% true. In my city, if you can't afford to live in the city of San Diego, it's very likely that you live in southern Riverside County, more than an hour away. You may live in Baja California, literally in a different country, and sit at our border checkpoint for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, emitting carbon. So what I appreciate about abundance was I think that it invited us to kind of consider the full impacts of stuff and what was the stated purpose of whatever said regulation is and how has it actually been applied. And I want to make sure I'm never one of these long-winded politicians, but I would just say one of the things that keeps me up nights, certainly the lack of housing and what that does, particularly to the Gen Z and Gen Alpha and people behind, but it's also the inability for government to innovate at the rate that the general public now expects. And what I mean by that is that I think early in my career, San Diego sometimes lives in the shadow of Los Angeles. I'd like to say it the opposite way. I think LA lives in the shadow of San Diego. But my point is that the competition was another city. I think recent decades have allowed us to have more of a global perspective, realizing that cities compete with other cities in other countries on the other side of the planet. But I want people to start thinking about the fact that government is increasingly competing with the device in your pocket. Meaning to say that when I tell you that I'll get to your pothole in the next 72 hours to a week, that is absolutely unacceptable to the average San Diegan or consumer. I can order something from anywhere in the world and it may get to my doorstep within hours. We have to find a way to make sure that we are operating at the pace that the public now expects. And in a democracy where the citizen is the highest office in our land, when we are not meeting their expectations, that invites much bigger problems for which we should all be very concerned.
I think that's right. And one of the things that we've really tried to do is embrace AI. There's a lot of issues around AI. The amount of power it consumes, the amount of land that it takes to, host processing. I get all that. The fear that someday it may decide that human beings really aren't worth the trouble. That's 10 years out there, who knows? But bottom line is right now, it's an enormous resource multiplier. And we, have embraced it here. I mean, every one of my direct reports has been required to create 5 agentic employees by the end of the year. And that's a big impact on a small nonprofit. And I think for cities too, doing a lot more with not less, but just the same is going to be really valuable and important. You're coming into your term at the Conference of Mayors. I guess one of the things, I'll just finish with is an invitation to you and your colleagues is this implementation project is a really big deal for us. There are nearly 50 housing bills in this package, and they all are going to require some degree of implementation. And if we don't do it with the knowledge and experience of the people who actually have to use the programs, there's no way we're going to get it right. And so we have a task force that's working on this. We're using AI to help write regs for the administration. And we really would love for you and the staff of the conference to help us out and get involved to make sure that when you get the end product, it works because you helped design it.
That's right. Well, I'll take you up on that. Make that commitment right here in front of all your listeners. Is very important. And mayors feel a lot of ownership over this legislation, and we want to correctly celebrate. And we don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but we do very much want to have the conversation about Housing 2.0, both the implementation of this piece of legislation, the appropriation for it, right?
Yep.
To actually fund the programs that are contained within it. And then, as we've been discussing, there's no silver bullet. This one bill alone is not going to solve the housing crisis for the country. And that isn't to say that it's not a monumental accomplishment. It truly is. At the same time, we have to continue to do more. And I'll give you a quick example. Our land development code here at the city of San Diego is something that we update annually. Now, a lot of my colleagues do it every couple of decades, maybe. And the reason we do that is that invariably we find some sort of red tape that we probably should get rid of. But it's also true, there's a lot of innovation in the housing space. Office to residential conversion, container shifts, modular, 3D printing, mass timber, whatever the case is. I'm trying to capture all of that in our code to make sure that if someone can put together the financing, the property, and the desire, that we're going to say yes. And so my point is that we have to continue to keep knocking on the door, not as ungrateful cities, but as folks who recognize that we're not there yet, and we probably never will be completely there. And we want to really push that innovation. Again, something kind of akin to this abundance idea of being responsive and quick and whatnot. But with regard to implementation, your head is where mine is. And I'm hosting our conference in San Diego next month to start that conversation and saying we've celebrated, fired off all the press releases, and we've sent out the social media posts. But we need to implement successfully. And then we need to figure out what that next innovation is and make sure that our federal partners are aligned with cities like mine.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for joining us. It's the first of Well, it's not the first, but it's one of many conversations that we'll have. And I'm really looking forward to your term at U.S. Conference of Mayors and continuing to work with you as Mayor of San Diego.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Four Walls Conversations on Affordable Housing. If today's conversation inspired you, we invite you to continue the discussion by visiting the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you'll find the latest housing policy news and analysis, our paycheck-to-paycheck database, practical research and resources, upcoming events, and information about becoming an NHC member. At NHC, we're bringing together leaders from across the housing spectrum to advance tangible, impactful, and achievable solutions for today's pressing housing challenges. We hope you'll join us by becoming a member. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
This podcast was edited by Resonate Recordings.